Welcome, everybody. I'm Tony Byrne, Managing Director of Minerva Money Management. I have with me our usual two guests, the good-looking young duo here of Awet Ghirmay, who is our Head of Research, and Carl Roberts, who is my fellow handsome director.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, guys.
What an intro.
How great to be young. I was once. Anyway.
You still look young, Tony.
Thanks. So today's podcast, what is it all about? Well, it's all about all things related to investing, primarily shares, but we do occasionally get onto other asset classes such as property and bonds. They're all related in a way. And what we really aim to do is to give you the latest cutting edge ideas on how and where to invest based on the greatest investors and fund managers in the world that we know about. All three of us are avid readers and learners. The old saying, learners are earners. We really believe that. So we hope to and expect to give you great value for watching and listening to podcasts, because you've got a lot of experience here in the room. And if you follow what we recommend, there's a tremendous chance that you'll be pretty wealthy yourself one day if you aren't already. It goes without saying that the value of your investments can rise or fall, and you may not get back the full amount invested. Clearly, anything we say today is based on our personal views. There's no guarantees. We would thoroughly recommend you do your own research. Don't take anything we say as recommendations or advice, because it's not. It's just our personal views. So it's very important to be very thorough in your own approach. In my own experience, I've found even the greatest investors in the world that I've followed, whenever I've tried to follow their share tips, it never seems to work for whatever reason. And that's because every one of us has got a different makeup, a different risk profile, different time scale, say, for investing. So it's really important to tailor your research to your own personality. Don't take it as read what we say. That doesn't mean there isn't great value, but you're not me, you're not Awet, you're not Carl. So be yourself, be true to yourself, and follow the general principles. You won't go very far wrong, because we think we're pretty well researched in following the best investors in the world. So without any further ado, we're going to go into the first section of our podcast, which is topical news. And I really think there's a lot to talk about this week. So let's kick off with Awet. What's topical for you in the investment scene, Awet?
Right. Everyone seems to be talking about Nvidia. I think Nvidia is the hot topic in the investment world. The stock has been going up significantly in the last few years. And the question everyone is asking is it going to continue, or is it going to be a pullback? Because the AI hype is still here, and how long that will continue, that's the big news in the market.
Great. Okay. Very true. It's really defined all expectations. Incredible rise in not just share price, but in profitability and turnover. Carl, what's in the news for you this week?
I think also, just to add on the video, I think was it this week they announced a stock split. So for those of you who don't know what a stock split is, they've effectively given each shareholder 9 additional shares. So it's a 10-for-1 stock split. And basically companies will do this when their share price reaches a certain amount. So Nvidia's, I think for a while now, has been trading over $1,000 per share, and it just starts to make that one share unaffordable for a lot of investors. So they'll split the shares so that ultimately the price will come down, but it doesn't impact your actual holding as such. You just have more shares at a lower price, and it just improves liquidity and makes the stock a bit more affordable. So I don't know when that's going to happen, but they did announce it with their first quarter results, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good idea. Interestingly, the world's most famous and eldest investor, probably Warren Buffett, he's famous for never ever doing a stock split with Berkshire Hathaway A shares, which now stand at roughly $550,000 per share. My goodness me, I'd like to own a few of those.
Yeah, I think the good thing about a stock split is it makes it cheaper to buy it. For example, for anyone can afford it and to enter in the market. For example, Berkshire Hathaway shares, as you said, it's quite expensive.
Yes.
Not many people can afford it. But
Well,
yeah,
that's not true. All three of us managed to buy some Berkshire Hathaway shares, which qualified us to go to the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting in May. Is it because we're loaded? Not necessarily. We bought the B shares, so we cheated a bit. They only cost $400 each.
right.
Now, for me, the great news, well, not the great news, the interesting news this week, not entirely investment related, admittedly, but the announcement yesterday that Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 charges by a jury on concealing evidence regarding this sort of hush money to do with this prostitute, which he denied, but clearly he's lying. I found it quite interesting, and I find it quite interesting country, America, that's got a very severe penal system, but it seems likely that Trump will escape just with a fine. Of course, it would help the Democrats if he went to jail, because I don't see how he can be president of a country if he's in prison. But he's made history for being the first US president ever to have been convicted in a criminal trial as a potential presidential candidate. It just seems extraordinary that he'd probably still be free to to make it to the next election and probably get voted president still. What do you guys think of that?
Apparently, you can still run even if you're in jail. So yeah, I'm not sure how you do your campaigning, but apparently it is allowed. You can be a presidential nominee and run from jail.
Well, he can still do. He's been readmitted to Twitter apparently, or X as it's now known. So yes, nothing will stop him doing his endless.
The thing is with Trump, he's Marmite, isn't he? You know, you either love him or hate him, and for his supporters, this will just rally them, won't it? It will feed into that narrative of the system's against me. You know, we need to break the system. You know,
regardless of the fact that he's been proven by a jury to be telling outright lies. You know, but then again, what do we expect of politicians?
Yeah, it's just a sad state of affair that biggest country in the world, and that's your two options to choose from, isn't it? As presidential candidate,
not great.
Bit similar to the UK.
True. Yeah, I don't think anyone wants to vote for either party. Yeah. But we did say, Carl, before today's podcast, we weren't going to talk politics. Unfortunately,
no. Well, this
quick.
my sort of topical news section was just to mention. Obviously, the general election has been announced.
Yes.
So, I think from an investing point of view, we don't really care too much about politics, because if you look at all the charts and overlay different presidents and different prime ministers and things, you'll see that most of the time stock market is always advancing upwards over the long term. So I think politicians have little kind of impact on that. It's more probably to do with your taxes and things where politicians will make a bit of difference. And I think we're all, again, without delving too much into politics, I think we're all of the opinion of wanting a smaller state. And unfortunately, in the UK, it just seems like every party is very similar and is increasing the size of the state more than anything. There doesn't appear to be anyone offering kind of lower taxes. Maybe reform. UK sort of, I think they've said a bit about reducing taxes, but I think Labour, the favourites, have said they're pretty much going to keep everything as it is for now, aren't they?
Yeah, interestingly, when you look back in history, stock markets have often done very well under Labour governments, perversely.
Right.
I suppose because it's always forward-looking. Maybe they're forward-looking to the next Conservative government, but it just, like you say, Carl, there's not much between the parties now. They're both socialist parties, basically, in my book. So, yeah, not much to choose between them. So I don't think it would make a massive difference which seems inevitable, Labour get in. because it's hard to see anyone else winning the election. And quite frankly, I don't see how the Conservatives deserve it, really. They've been pretty useless so far.
Yeah, but if you look at historically, the market, I mean, even Warren Buffett has said it, the market has gone through wars, Second World War, and so on and so on, but the market over time just rises. I think the key thing we learn here is to think long term, not to worry about the politics.
And perversely, stock markets do well during wars, because when you think about it, there's a lot of productivity increases. I mean, if you add the sum returns from the First World War and the Second World War, the US stock market combined over those two periods rose 100%.
Right.
So what tends to happen, there's an initial shock, isn't there? Stock markets take an initial dive, but then productivity increases because, of course, there's a lot of production, with wars, particularly in the arms industry. So, yeah, that's a perverse result, but that's the way it is. Anyway, guys, interesting so far. Now on to the main topic of today's podcast, which is the subject of longevity,
right?
No less. So I'm going to put you right on the spot here, Awet, because I don't have a dictionary definition. Define longevity for me.
Yeah, I mean, the things about longevity is to just live longer, healthier, because if you think about it, aging affects everyone and everywhere. So to just live longer and to be healthier while living longer. Because if you look at the global life expectancy for men is 70 years and for women is 75 years. But longevity means to extend that to 110, 20 and beyond.
Yes.
And as some scientists believe, like for example, Ray Kurzweil, he believes longevity is aging is a solvable problem. It can be solved over time. Because if you look at the statistic, it's huge. By 2050, there will be around 2.1 billion people over the age of 60. And that's a huge market opportunity for investors to participate in that space.
Well, I certainly hope I'm one of them when that time comes.
Right.
So, Carl, how about you? Can you think of any examples of changes and the future outlook for longevity, apart from what Awet's just said? Maybe he's already answered that question inadvertently.
Yeah, I think what we should say as well is that longevity is one of our kind of seven key themes that we look at as investors. So I think we mentioned way back in one of the original episodes is that we believe there's seven key themes where all the growth is going to come from in the future, and longevity is one of those themes. And like Awet says, it's not just about extending life; it's about the quality of your life. So it might not necessarily mean that we're extending people's age past 100, but we are improving that period, maybe from 60 to 90. So you've got a really good quality of life. So trying to tackle like dementia, trying to tackle other problems of aging, like your bones, your organs, things like that.
Yes.
I think the big key sort of turning point was this all about the gene editing, wasn't it? I think once they were able to start, looking at genes and the kind of DNA of that, they were able to start looking into the kind of building blocks of human life. And I think it's been described now as aging is like an engineering problem. It's a problem that could potentially be solved if you get the right coding, into kind of someone's genes and things. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in this space.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think companies like CRISPR, which is a Swiss-based company, is a gene editing. They're doing a great work in this space. I think they are editing genes, for example. Historically, if there's an illness in the generation, from transferring to the next generation, by editing the gene, you can minimize the illness not to be transferred to the next generation. So there's a huge opportunities and a huge market for companies to work in this space.
Yeah. I've got a personal interest because I'm 65, nearly 66. So as I've got older, I've taken more of a personal interest in keeping fitter and eating healthier. So I do watch various videos on this, and someone I recently picked up, being interviewed by Joe Rogan, was a guy called David Sinclair, and he recommends various supplements, some of which I've taken up personally. there's something called NMN, which helps to boost what's called your NAD levels. Now, NAD, as you get older, you lose energy. Your DNA can worsen, so it can help improve things like your DNA, your genes, your energy levels, and so you can live a healthier life for longer. So typically it might take 10, 15 years off your life. He also recommends various other supplements. I mean, I've personally used two of them. This NMN that boosts your NAD level that gets depleted as you get older, and also something called resveratrol. He also recommends various others, but I don't want to get obsessed by it. Another one was an interesting one, which is not only recommended by David Sinclair, but also Jim Mellon at a conference. And Jim Mellon owns a company called Juvenescence, which we're going to talk about later. One thing that some people take is metformin, which is a drug for diabetes patients. But studies show that people who take metformin live longer. Now, some people take it even though they don't have diabetes. Now, it's not prescribed in the UK, but there are certain countries where you can get it over the counter, in chemists, for example. So that's just an interesting different take. Some people believe in supplements. Not for everyone, not for you young guys, but I think it'll work for me. So there we have it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well. It's not just a case of scientific research and things into kind of future changes. It's also lifestyle, isn't it? Yeah. We're understanding more now what causes diabetes, what causes heart disease. So it's then advising people on being able to make changes to their lives, improving maybe the quality of food, not being so overly produced. There's even a thing now, isn't there, in regenerative farming, things like that. So all this sorts of stuff. It's not just about kind of future inventions, it's also improving what's around now.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing as well nowadays, I think there's a technology. You can track, I mean, your heartbeats and so on and so on. You can see how much steps you did during the day. If you're not exercising enough, you can increase your exercise, the way you eat. Yes. And some foods are sometimes our body doesn't absorb them properly, and you can change that. By changing that over time, you can improve your life and you can live longer.
So, Awet, can you think of any companies, investment opportunities in the longevity space? That's a heavy hint to a company beginning with J.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of the longevity market in the long run is expected to be bigger than the healthcare market, and you can see already the big tech companies are already investing in this space. Like, for example, Apple with Apple Watch is actually helping us to live longer by tracking our movement, our fitness and activity, what we do every day. That's one thing, but I think interesting one was Juvenescence, for example, that we invested in the company. And there's another one. Jeff Bezos has invested in this company called Altos Lab. But what they do is their mission is to restore health and resilience. And the goal is to reverse disease and disabilities. So there are several companies working in this space, and there'll be more. As I mentioned earlier as well, a company called CRISPR is working on this space. There are many, many companies.
Isn't the problem, Awet, that most, if not all of them, are unquoted?
Yes, that's one of the biggest problem you have. I mean, I looked at most of them are unquoted because it's a growing market and expected to grow in the long run. As we mentioned earlier, the statistic by 2050, if we have 2.1 billion people over the age of 60, there will be more care will be required for those people. And I think it's a huge market, and you can see people like Jeff Bezos already spotting these opportunities and investing early. And other companies like Nvidia and so on are investing as well through AI to speed up the process and so on.
Yeah, that's one of the areas I find very interesting is this ability to use your own cells to reproduce organs, like your heart, liver, kidneys, which it makes me quite optimistic. Maybe I could live much, much longer, maybe for hundreds of years, because it'll be like changing the parts in a car. You can just change all the parts, so you've got a brand new car. which reminds me of the Only Fools and Horses Trigger with his broom. Do you remember there was an episode when he was asked how long, this was a road sweeper, how long had he owned his broom? And he said, I'd owned it 40 years. And they said, well, how could you have done? He said, well, I've only had 4 handles and 3 brushes replaced in that time.
Right.
So, funnily enough, our bodies, could be regenerated to live a long time. So I was at a conference once, one of the investment conferences in London, and I think it was Jim Mellon again, mentioned that it's already the first person to live to 1,000 years of age has already been born, which did blow my mind. What do you think about that, Carl?
Yeah, who knows whether that's true or not? But I do think a lot of these investing areas we talk about are all overlapped, aren't they? So
Yes.
a big thing that's going to help the longevity space is going to be AI again, because a lot of the time, trying to tackle dementia, cancer, it's a case of just constantly experimenting and getting the right code. And we're limited by the human brain and the amount of computer power we've got. But as that increases, as we get more computer power and artificial intelligence are using super brains, you can see that actually all these problems can eventually be solved because we've just got that much more power going into it. So possibly there could be someone that's living to 1,000 going forward. There probably won't be the same person as such, because like you say, I think there's a natural human shelf life for certain organs and things. But if they're all replaced, you might be the same sort of body, but different soul.
I was a bit late on the scene because this film came out like 40 years ago, but I finally watched Terminator, and of course Terminator is about a cyborg. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a cyborg, and you can't help thinking, what with Neuralink and Elon Musk having this computer chip for the brain, you kind of thinking we're going to end up being cyborgs in the future. A lot of these science fiction films have predicted it, haven't they?
Yeah. There is a whether it's right or wrong element to this, isn't there? Because you can imagine getting to the stage where parents choosing to have a child can start editing the features of that child, can't they? It's sort of, where does it sort of cross the line, really? But if it was a case of, right, we've assessed your egg and it's got these conditions that are going to come out of the child, and you say, right, well, can I remove them so it doesn't come out with cancer or a lost limb, all this sort of stuff, is that right or wrong? I don't know, but there is going to be those questions to talk through, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier the company CRISPR is pretty much working on this space, gene editing, and the moral part is actually very controversial nowadays. I mean, you can use it if, like, as we mentioned earlier, if there's an illness in the generation, not to transfer, but to edit. For example, people can edit their features, they can be taller, and so on and so on. And people are thinking, okay, the next generation will be a CRISPR babies or CRISPR kids, so they will look different. They will look unique because you design them based on how you want them to be designed. And that's the moral element is very controversial now. And I think it will be quite subjective to so many moral issues. How do we move forward? But I see that the good things about this is for, like, for example, sickle cell illness disease. This sort of stuff is very important to tackle these areas. But when it comes to adding features, it's just that's the one is quite questionable.
Yeah, it does feel like a step too far, really, doesn't it? This all started off by the Nazis in the 30s. I've forgotten the name for it now, where you just, because they wanted this master race, didn't they? White, blonde hair, blue eyed. The perfect, in their view, the perfect sort of person. I think it's a bit sad in a way, because people who do have children that aren't perfect, you do have disabilities, they often talk about how rewarding it is dealing with these kind of children. They might be, they might have some disability, but they're rewarded in other ways. They might be very cheerful, very optimistic, for example, childlike for the rest of their lives. There can be lots of rewards as well. So it's a very difficult one. Morally, isn't it, to overcome? But only society can decide on what they want, really, for that in the future. That could be a downside. Going back to this longevity techniques. One of the interesting ones I did hear about at one event was this concept of regenerating your liver, but apparently a liver can be sliced up many times and regrown. So you might get, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 livers out of one liver.
Wow.
Which reminds me of I watched some of these videos on how to grow vegetables and fruit, and they're quite funny. But it's so simple, really. But for some reason, I never get round to it, where you can just find, I don't know.
What, chopping up your liver?
Yeah, no. You can just find like one vegetable in a supermarket, and you can replant it, and it starts growing roots. Yeah, but before you replant it, it starts growing roots. Then you put it in a tub with earth, and suddenly, within a few weeks, you've got many of that vegetable, and it works with virtually any vegetable or fruit you can find in a supermarket. It's just extraordinary. And the parallel with the liver is the same concept. That you can grow more out of one organ, which is quite extraordinary. I think the biggest challenge is going to be your brain. How do they prevent the brain deteriorating? Because that seems to be the biggest problem these days, dementia.
Yeah, because the brain is very complicated. I think we don't understand it much. I mean, when we say, even like, for example, when we say like things like consciousness, it just, we can explain it, but we don't really understand what we mean by consciousness. That's why it becomes very complicated when it gets to the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. But that's the one thing. You don't want to live a very long life if you're going to spend the last 30, 50, 100 years of it in a state of dementia. As long as we can control the brain, which brings me on to another useful tip, I think, for listeners. We recently went to this Berkshire shareholders meeting, and two of the great legends of investing were Charlie Munger, sadly deceased in December, and Warren Buffett, still alive. Both voracious readers. I mean, really, Charlie Munger described himself as like a book on four legs, or two legs and an arm, to his children. Warren Buffett still reads 500 pages a day. These men, not the fittest looking of men. Warren Buffett has already admitted that for many years that he lives a 7-year-old's diet. He's overweight. He doesn't look like he ever goes to the gym, and Charlie Munger never did either. But they both live well into their 90s. Charlie Munger nearly 100. So, like exercise is for your physical health, you can't help thinking reading, and I mean reading books, not reading from a screen. Reading is fantastic for your brain health, and that alone is going to probably help you live a lot longer. Of course, we had a very famous wartime leader called Winston Churchill, who, by all accounts, had a terrible diet. He'd be drinking alcohol at breakfast time and smoking cigars. Wow. He was overweight. He lived into his 90s. Now, he didn't live great quality of life physically the last 10 years or so of his life, and that's the downside. I fear the same thing with Charlie Munger. Warren Buffett doesn't seem to be physically disabled, but Charlie Munger was struggling in the last few years of his life. But if we can solve this and not only live longer, like you said at the very outset, Awet, but to have a quality of life and your brain functioning very well, I think that's an absolute dream for most people.
Yeah. I think the greatest part, if you look at Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, I think it's just not they were readers, but they love what they did. I mean, what they do daily. I think that's important. It gives them a purpose to continue and live full, great.
Absolutely perfect point. And of course, on our shores, British shores, a great example to me is David Attenborough. He's in his mid to late 90s. He hasn't worked for decades. He's followed his passion. And he doesn't look like he's in the greatest physical health, but mentally, my goodness, he's still got it. He could easily reach 100. It's a man who's followed his passion. So that's another key point. This isn't just about drugs, is it? No. Guys, it's about lots of things to do with your lifestyle. And if you do what you love and you've got enthusiasm for it, then you probably will live longer anyway, because that will naturally lead you to want to improve. And if you want to improve, you're going to have to read more, Anyway, guys, we've spent probably enough time on the longevity section. A lot of interesting points you've all made. What I'd like to now move on to is the section we do every time we have this podcast, which is recommendations. Now, it can be anything really. Normally investment related. It can be books, podcasts, films, or series. So anything interesting that you've read or watched or followed recently, Awet?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Howard Marks. He's a fixed income investor, and recently he had a memo about debt. I mean, because debt is a big topic. Recently, governments like in the US, most governments are indebted, and he was talking about how historically debt has been very important, and companies that survive for 1,000 years, the main reason is by minimizing debt, having less debt, and that makes them more robust. They will have a robust balance sheet, and they will be stronger over time, and they can survive. I think the key thing is when you have low debt, you can survive for longer. And so I listen to Howard Marks, and he's always bringing interesting insight about debt, about market, about human behavior, and so on, about risk, for example. So it's interesting. I would definitely advise Howard Mark memo on the podcast.
So basically, this is just he's a fund manager and investor, and he basically produces this. They call it a letter.
Yeah.
These sophisticated fund managers don't produce a newsletter; they call it a letter to their shareholders. So how do you obtain that then?
It's an Apple podcast. You can listen to it.
Oh, it's a podcast.
It's a podcast,
okay.
Yeah.
Or it can be an email, can't it? It can be an email letter.
Yeah.
How about you, Carl? Anyone interesting you've followed recently?
Yeah, I've got one, a book this week. So this is for the parents out there, sort of linked to what we're talking about, longevity, and obviously particularly for the next generation and raising good little humans. It's the Daily Dad book by Ryan Holiday, which is actually a Secret Santa present from Awet. It wasn't secret because he put his name on the right. gift thing, but it's a brilliant book. It's a book that gives you a little passage that you can read every day. So the book's split into like 365 passages, good. And there's one per day, so it goes through like a diary. So you could either read it all in one go, or I sort of read one a day. So I'm sort of nearly halfway through the book, being May when we're recording this. And it's just, I think as a parent, we're so busy now, aren't we? And you can forget about being intentional with how you're raising your kids. You just kind of, you treat it as a bit of a job, don't you? And you're just getting by because you're so busy. But actually, if you just take a couple of minutes, sit back and just think of some of the fundamentals of parenting, this book just really helps you kind of go back to the principles and focusing much more on just giving them a really good life, raising just really nice, helpful people, rather than worrying about all the exams and telling them off and trying to discipline them and all of that. So yeah, really recommend that. The Daily Dad by Ryan Holiday.
Okay. Well, for myself, as this is a subject of longevity, it's probably best for me to come up with something health related. And I've watched many videos by a lady called Barbara O'Neill, who is an Australian, who is absolutely brilliant in terms of coming up with solutions to improve your health that don't involve taking any pills or any medication at all. It's all based on natural remedies, which involves natural foods and drink. She's so good. She's a trained nurse, but she's written books as well, and her lectures, she always uses a whiteboard, are just so captivating. She's so brilliant. What's sad is she was driven out of Australia because she told the truth. The health industry is a huge one. So the government virtually forced her out. They threatened her with imprisonment. And she hadn't actually done anything wrong. She was just trying to help people live a healthier life. So I think that's a tremendous series to watch. Barbara O'Neill, get a book, because it supports the subject of today, longevity, living this healthier life whilst living longer. So that's my recommendation this week, guys. So we've rapidly come to a close. I've thoroughly enjoyed the time with you today. I always find our debates endlessly fascinating. So just thank you for your time today, Awet and Carl. And look forward to the next episode.
Yep. See you soon.
Bye for now.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. Please help us spread the word by sharing this podcast with your family and friends. And don't forget to subscribe.